Welcome to Seth's Daily Podcast here on Nighthawk Radio. You can listen to Seth's Daily Podcast every Sunday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here on nighthawk-radio.com. Appreciate everybody that's listened. Appreciate everybody that's liked the Facebook page and gave us a follow. Blessed enough to have a legend in the building, Mary Deese Hampton. How are you doing tonight, Mary Deese
Oh,
Hampton?
I appreciate the title, but I cannot accept that title. I'm just a happy to be working actress sometimes. But thank you.
Absolutely. And your husband's a legend as well, James Hampton.
Oh, now he was a legend. His career spanned over 45 years. He was the dad in Teen Wolf. He was caretaker in The Longest Yard. He was a Golden Globe nominee, part of a Screen Actors Guild Award cast nominee. The very first thing he ever did was a little short subject film in New York City in 1962, and it got nominated for an Academy Award. And he was the lead in that little short subject film. So he had quite a long and prolific career, not only as an actor, but he was a writer. And then the last 12 years we were in Hollywood, he directed a lot of sitcoms that a lot of your fans may know, Sister Sister, Smart Guy, Grace Under Fire, oh gosh, Zoe with Selma Blair. That was her sitcom. Oh gosh, just tons and tons. He worked continuously.
Yeah, and he was on one of my favorite shows, Gunsmoke, and you actually got a pretty cool story about Gunsmoke,
Oh,
in
a
connection with The
Gunsmoke.
Longest Yard. Yeah,
Yes, yes. He met Burt Reynolds on the set of that show. That was the very first show in Los Angeles that he ever did, and he did a lot of those westerns afterwards. But yeah, he and Burt remained lifelong friends. Burt Reynolds, and they did, I think, 5 or 6 movies together, and then Burt. Got a sitcom called Evening Shade back in the early 90s, and there were a lot of folks in that. Hal Holbrook and Ossie Davis, Ruby Dee, Mary Lou Henner, and he was instrumental in getting Jim on the show to play a high school friend at a reunion episode. And Harry and Linda Bloodworth Thomason, who they were responsible for designing Women and a lot of other shows during that time period. They loved him so much they hired him as a writer, and he was 54 years old. And he said, I believe that I was probably the oldest rookie writer writing for television at that time. He said everybody else was like 25. So yeah, and he and Bert remained lifelong friends until Bert's passing.
and they was in the legendary movie The Longest Yard.
Absolutely, that was Jim's Golden Globe nomination, but he didn't want to play the role that the producers wanted him to play. They wanted him to play the role of Unger, the snitch who ultimately is responsible for caretaker's demise in the cell. And he was in a meeting with Bob Aldrich, and Bert was there, and he said, well, I really don't want to play Unger. And Bob Aldrich said, well, Unger's a great role, and what do you want to play? And he said, I'd like to play caretaker. And he said, well, caretaker's only got 5 lines. And Jim said, well, now he's only got 5 lines. And so when they started working together, he got that role. And when they started working together, the producers and the director saw the great chemistry that he and Bert had because they'd been friends for 10 years at that point, and they just kind of let him go. And the scene, the pretty famous scene where they're in Bert's, I think they're in Bert's cell or caretaker cell, I can't remember, but they are making some moonshine in the tank of the toilet in there, and they have a conversation about why Bert's character, threw the game, and and that was pretty much improvised. They told the director what they wanted to do, and they just let him go, and it was a great scene.
Definitely, that's a legendary movie.
Yes, absolutely. And when the remake came out, Jim and I traveled a lot doing Comic Cons for about 12 or 13 years, and people would often ask him, about The Longest Yard, and when they did the remake, people would say, "Oh, Mr. Hampton, did you see the remake? What'd you think?" And Jim said, "No." He said, I really don't want to see it. Well, why not? And he said, well, because if I don't like it, then it's going to sound like sour grapes for me to say I don't like it. But let me just say this: as funny of a man as he is, and as good as he was in the movie, Chris Rock did not get nominated for a Golden Globe for that role, and Jimmy did. So, I can appreciate, why he didn't want to, make a bad comment about that movie in case he didn't like it.
That's a class act for sure. Definitely. And he was also in Teen Wolf as well.
Yes, Teen Wolf, that's an interesting story too. He went in to audition for the role of the coach. Mi casa es su casa. And Jay Tarsis got that role. And he was absolutely fabulous in it. But he went in to read for the role of the coach, and he read, and he was leaving the studio and walked down the hall. And the casting director came running up behind him and said, Jim, would you mind coming in and reading for another role? And Jim said he thought, oh, great, I'm going to be paramedic number 2 or guy number 3 or something like that. And when he went back into the casting room, Michael was there, and he had been there, Michael J. Fox, and he had seen Jim's audition, and they hadn't cast the dad yet. And so they had them read together, and it was just instant, father son thing. And that was terrific. He loved Michael, loved him, loved him, loved him. And Jim always used to say that that movie uh, was a little movie that was better than it needed to be. It's a classic.
It is for sure. Definitely a classic. And he has a funny ghost story too.
Oh my gosh, the paranormal. So I am a paranormal buff. I like ghost hunting. I like scary movies. I mean, I'm old enough that I go back to those old Hammer studio films with Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing and all that. I started young on those, and I just love horror. Jimmy was a comedy guy, but he God bless his sweet time. He'd do anything I asked him to do. So, I said, well, let's go ghost hunting because I'd always watch Ghost Hunters and when all that was going on. And so we would do that. And we went to a lot of horror sci-fi shows. And why I don't know, because Teen Wolf is really not a horror, movie per se, and neither is Sling Blade. But Jim did some sci-fi. And so we would get invited to the shows, and Jim would do a lot of panels. And he was doing a panel one time, and the host asked him, well, Mr. Hampton, have you ever had any experiences with a ghost? And Jim said, well, yes, indeed, I have. And so the story is this: when he was in college at the North Texas State college in Denton, Texas, Denton was dry, and so the boys would have to drive to Fort Worth to get their liquor, and he was with his friend who had just gotten a new convertible. This is like 1957, and they drove to Fort Worth, and they were partaking of their purchases on the way back to campus. And for some reason, Jim thought it would be a real good idea to throw beer cans at the police station, and sure enough, here they come. They get pulled over, and Jim said his friend Bob had a real innocent looking face, so they picked on him, and they took him over to the justice of the peace, and the justice of the peace said, Hampton, how much money do you have? And Jim said, I got $11, sir. He said, okay, well, that's your fine, but you've got to do 100 hours of community service. And he said, well, what do I have to do? He said, well, you can start by mowing the cemetery. So there's a little cemetery, which is a big cemetery now, but it's still there. Little cemetery over by the campus. And the next day, when Jim sobered up, he thought, "Oh man, this is really embarrassing. I don't want my friends seeing me. I'm mowing the cemetery. So I'm just going to do it at night. So he went out with his little push mower, one of those rotating blade mowers they had back in the 50s, and he went out about 11 o'clock at night, and he's out there grrr, grrr, mowing that cemetery. And he'd been out there about 30 minutes, and all of a sudden, here comes a police car, and guys got out and shined the light on him and said, Hampton, is that you? Oh, yes, sir. What are you doing out here? He said, I'm doing my community service. And there was a beat, and they started laughing, and they said, get out of here. And what had happened was a woman who lived across the street from the cemetery had called the police station and said, there's a ghost in the cemetery, and you'll never guess what it's doing. And so Jim said in his ghost story, he was the ghost.
That's an amazing story. I appreciate you telling that story for sure.
Yeah, but we had a lot of fun. He was a lot of fun, and pretty much what you saw was who he was. He was that great dad in Teen Wolf. He was that best friend in The Longest Yard. You know, he was that counselor, in Sling Blade. He was just a great guy. And I have continued over the last couple of years doing the Comic Cons with pre-signed memorabilia and photos that he had. And I was trepidatious about that at first because I thought, oh, I'm just going to sit there and cry, and it has been so uplifting for me because people will tell me stories about how, a performance he had, affected them. Guys will say, and they said this to Jim too, when I grew up, I didn't have a dad. And I always wished that I had a dad that was like, Harold Howard from Teen Wolf. And some of his celebrity friends, I get to see them when I'm out and about doing it. And they have stories about Jimmy that I never knew. And I was like, how could I not have known that story? And I'll tell you a funny one real quick. A friend of his said to me, he said, well, did Jim ever tell you the grocery store story? And I said, well, there's one in his autobiography, but which one is it? He said, well, and it was one I hadn't heard. He said, well, Jim had gone to the grocery store one Saturday morning. It was real crowded and there was a lot of, it was raining and there were a lot of people. And he said he looked over and there was an elderly lady who was she was struggling to put her groceries from the cart into her trunk. And so he went over there. He said, can I help you, ma'am? And she said, oh, yes, please. So he proceeded to put her groceries into her trunk. And when he was finished, he took the cart and he was walking away. And he said, well, have a good day. And she said, oh, I sure will. My kids will never believe that Ned Beatty helped me with my groceries. And I don't think he corrected her.
And he was in Gomer Pyle as well.
Oh, yes, Branch Eversole. Branch Eversole. That was actually the first show that I ever saw him in. I didn't watch a lot of westerns, so I remembered him from that episode. So he was really good. I think it was
Yeah, I
called
like.
The Feud and Piles or something like that.
Yeah, it's a good show for sure. And you was in Blockbuster.
I was. That was the last series that I did. That was a couple years ago. I do a lot of commercials and series and movies and things like that. But I loved working on that. Randall Park, I played his mother in that show, and he was just a delight to work with. And when I was in Harold and Kumar playing Harold's mother, an actor, a wonderful actor by the name of Clyde Katsatsu, played my husband. And in Blockbuster, another wonderful actor named James Saito played my husband. And the two of them had been in a wonderful, wonderful movie from the 70s called Farewell to Manzanar. And it was about Japanese families who had been relocated to the camps, the internment camps during World War II. And if you've never seen it, it's just heart wrenching, but it is so good. And both of them were fairly young when they did that movie, young men, and they were amazing. But I think that was an interesting coincidence that they both played my husbands.
I love Blockbuster. That was a great show.
It was a great show, and unfortunately, it was number 8 most watched television series on Netflix when they canceled it. I couldn't believe it. I was shocked. But, they can do what they want to. So, I have a lot of people say how much they enjoyed that show, but alas, it's gone.
Yeah, it's a great show. It was about the last blockbuster in the U.S., right? Or in the whole entire world. Whole entire
Yeah,
world, I believe.
yeah, yeah. And at the time, I don't know if it's still there, there was one in Portland. I think there was the last blockbuster was in Portland or something. Portland or Washington State. I can't remember.
Yeah, that's amazing though. I love that show though, man. I watched the
It was
whole
a great
entire
show.
season in one night.
Yeah, it was a great show. It was very funny, and they had a great cast and I just it was just a shame, but man, there's so many venues for content out there now. They just, it just they're gone like that sometimes, and you don't know why. It's, Jim directed the last 12 years we were in LA, and he said they don't give shows a chance anymore. It took 14 weeks for Seinfeld to find its audience. And now if you don't have an audience, the first 3 episodes you're canned, and it's just too bad. But it's hard to get television has changed so much because of streaming and cable. People like you did the other day, you said you sat down, you watched the whole season in one fell swoop, so there can be a lot of fans out there that love a show, but if they're looking at ratings every week, they may not get great ratings every week because there's so much else to watch. People will say, okay, I'm going to binge watch this, and they love it, but by then it's already been canceled. That's too bad, too bad. There's lots of good shows that have gone that direction, unfortunately.
Yeah, bring back Blockbuster season 2. We need it.
Yeah. Bring back the mom, bring back the parents. I'm for it.
Exactly. Yeah, I love that show, man. Definitely. And you was in Fresh Prince of Bel-Air as well.
I was. I moved to LA in 93 and started working right away. I had started my acting career in Dallas, and Lou Diamond Phillips was my first acting coach before he got La Bamba. I studied with him for a year, and then he got La Bamba, and off he went. But I left in 93 and moved out to LA, and I was very fortunate because California is not a right to work state. And so in order to work the network shows at that time, you had to be a member of SAG or AFTRA. And because I had worked in Dallas, and had worked some SAG AFTRA productions, I was eligible to become SAG AFTRA right away, and I did, and that really opened a lot of doors for me. It's hard. It's hard for people that move there and are not SAG eligible. If you live anywhere else that's a right to work state like Texas or Louisiana or Oklahoma, New Mexico, it's not a problem getting work because you can work union and non-union. But if you move to California, that's that can be a real impediment to actors finding agents and finding jobs. But yeah, Fresh Prince and Family Matters were the first two sitcoms that I worked on. I did 3 episodes of each, and had a lot of fun. Will Smith he was so nice, and we had an episode that I was on where there were a lot of children. Will's character was taking the little boy to see a character. It was kind of like Barney, but it was Dougie the whale. And so that morning, he came out, and the cast and crew were there, and he said, listen, he said, we've been together for a while and we're real easy with each other, and we talk to each other like we want to. And he said, but we got kids on the set this week, and we really need to be conscious of the language that we use and like that. And I respected that because a lot of people might not have cared, and he did. And he wasn't even a father then, and so that really spoke to me, the kind of respect that he had for other people. So I like him.
Yeah, Will Smith's a legend for sure.
Pardon me?
I said Will Smith is a legend for sure.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, and super nice guy.
Yeah. I mean, he has all kinds of hit movies. I mean, you go on and on about his hit movie.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Amazing career. Amazing career. And he's still working. So, hats off. That speaks to, the caliber of acting that he's blessed with.
And he's a really good rapper too.
Oh yeah. Not that I listen to a lot of rap, but he did the song in the beginning of the show, so that was
Yeah, that's
him.
a classic intro for sure.
Yeah.
Definitely. And you're in a Panda Express commercial right now.
I did an international Panda Express commercial, which I have not seen, but it is showing somewhere around the world as we speak. I don't know where, and I'm interested. Jim had a fan that sent him a video of Teen Wolf in that was dubbed in Japanese. And it was fun to watch, and I thought, wow, I wonder if I can watch myself sometime in French, or in German, or doing that commercial because it so I'm excited about that. I did a National Jiffy Lube commercial the year before, and just it's the industry is really took a hit during COVID, and it's just still kind of limping back. Things changed a lot during that time. There were a lot of things that we do now that weren't the norm then, like uh, self-taping. Almost everything is self-taped auditions, which is a blessing and a curse, and it gives you the opportunity for shows that aren't you wouldn't necessarily be able to go in and audition for in person. But the flip side of that is I love auditioning in person, and there is a whole generation of new actors that don't know what it's like to audition, what we call in the room, and there's so much good in that because you can ask questions, you can get redirection, and you get the vibe there. And sometimes if you're lucky, when I auditioned for Harold and Kumar, Cal, Penn, and John Cho were there. I didn't read with them, but they were there at the audition. I don't know why, they just were. But I have a funny story about that. So the morning of the first day that we were shooting, our scene took place in a conference room, and it was Harold's parents and Kumar's parents, and we were being, interrogated by, the government officials, and Ed Helms played, the guy who was interpreting, what we were saying, and Rob Corddry played the CIA guy. But anyway, we were in the van, and I was sitting back in the back with Ed. Clyde Katsatsu was in the front, and they were driving us to the set. And I guess that was the first time that Ed had actually looked at his script, and he said, "Oh no, I actually have to speak Korean." And he realized he was going to have to speak Korean, and he said to Clyde, he said, can you help me with this Korean? And Clyde looked at him. He said, I'm Japanese, man. And so he turned to me. He said, can you help me with this Korean? And I said, well, I'm half Korean. I said, but what I can tell you is, just say the words phonetically, but draw everything out. Draw it all out. Whatever you say, make it long, like, you know. And I said, that'll get the tone across, and that's what he did, and it was hilarious. But they were a lot of fun to work with, and I don't. It was very difficult to keep a straight face because the directors just kind of we shot it once on book. So what that means is we shot it the way the script read, and then they just let them go. And the two of them, Rob Corddry and Ed Helms, it was you couldn't we would just collapse in laughter when the director would yell cut because they were so funny, and they used a lot of that improv in the movie.
Yeah, that's a good movie as well. Wasn't Neil Patrick Harris in that?
He was. I didn't have any scenes with him, but I saw something about 6 months ago on the internet that said that Harold and Kumar 4 may be in the works. And they had Neil Patrick Harris and both the guys, that said they would do it. But, it could take years for that to be put back together. And I'm thinking to myself, Harold and Kumar would be grandfathers by now. Because I think that movie was like in 2008. And so what is that? 18 is 10 years, 28 is, 20 years. And they were in their 20s then. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, they'd be 50-year-old men. So my character would probably be dead. So I don't know to hold out any hope that I would be in it.
Yeah, I was a kid when that movie came out. I love that movie
Yeah.
though.
Yeah. You shouldn't have been watching that movie as a kid.
uh,
It's pretty raunchy.
how you got sneak and watch?
Well, I tell you, in 50 years ago, 50 years ago, and I'm telling my age when I say this, I was a very young teenager. I was 13, and my two friends and I, the summer of 1975, snuck into Jaws when it came out in the theaters. And man, this year when they said Jaws turned 50, that was very sobering for me because I thought, oh no. It's like all those movies when I was growing up, like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and, those kind of movies. I'm just like, oh no, they can't be 50. But anyhow, they're still classics.
Definitely. That movie's a classic as well. Alvin and Kumar, that's a classic.
Well, now it is, but yeah, I can't believe it's nearly 20 years old. It's amazing.
Yep. And you're right. I shouldn't have been watching that as a kid. But I used to watch it on Comedy Central all the time. It seems like Comedy Central used to play it like on repeat.
Oh, well, it was pretty funny, It's I call it college boy humor. When I was young, we had Animal House that was kind of the same along that same vein, and there was a movie called Porky's and same kind of thing, that same kind of humor. So Harold and Kumar was like the Porky's of its era.
Yeah, it's a great movie though. Well, great movies.
Yes, yes,
Definitely.
they were fun. They were
That
fun.
White Castle one is hilarious as well.
Well, you gotta laugh. You can't take things too seriously all the time, And
Yeah.
that type of genre provides a lot of belly laughs, I think.
Yeah, they're great comedians as well.
Yeah, it's interesting that Cal went into politics for a while.
Really, I
He
didn't know that.
yeah, he had some kind of a position in the White House for several years, and now he's back acting. But it's funny. We see actors and we think of them. I think going to these Comic Cons, I've witnessed this where people remember actors from certain movies that they just loved, and they may be completely unaware that they did anything else, and it's interesting. Jimmy, my husband, could look at somebody and he could determine based on their age and their gender, what they might remember him from the best. If it was an older man, Longest Yard all the way. If it was a 30 or 40-year-old, Teen Wolf all the way. And if it was somebody over the age of 70, it was F Troop and Gunsmoke and all of those shows. But yeah, he enjoyed a wonderful career. He was a very talented man, very talented man.
Definitely.
I miss him. And it's very touching to me, meeting his fans at these Comic Cons, how many people just admired him so, and not just, other actors as well. Uh, I was at the Hollywood show. I had an appearance at the Hollywood show, and Billy Baldwin was there. And he came by the table and he said, "Oh man," he said, "I loved James. I just loved him." He said, "I loved him in everything he ever did." And he said, he pointed something out which was real interesting. He said he had this really unique voice, and he did. It was kind of a little high pitched Southern twang. And he never tried to get rid of it. He never tried to get rid of it. But so that's really neat to hear other celebrities that admired his work as well. So,
Yeah, somebody with a southern twang, I respect it for sure.
well, he did Dukes of Hazzard.
Really?
He played Sheriff Buster Moon in Dukes of Hazzard, and he said that season three, James Best, who played Roscoe P. Coltrane, was holding out. He happened to be a good friend of Jim's. Was holding out for more money because the show was very successful, number one show in the country at the time, and he was holding out for more money. And the network kind of called his bluff, and they said, you know what? Well, we'll just replace you. So they hired Jim and to play Sheriff Buster Moon, And he said he came out the first week and they were working. He said the second week, he said he was on set and he looked and here came James Best, and he hawing around with people. He thought, oh, great, he's going to come back, because they were like, fine, we'll hire somebody else. And so sure enough, Jim's agent called him and said, the suits want to meet with us. And so went in and they knew what was coming. And they said, Jim was under contract for 9 episodes. So they were going to have to pay him, whether they used him or not. They were going to have to pay him. So they were trying to figure out a way to use him, and they said, we're going to give Enos a spinoff. We're going to give, the deputy a spinoff. It's going to be called Enos, and we'd like for you to play this same character. And Jim said, no, and they puffed up and they said, well, why not? That's the number one show in the country. And Jim said, well, he said, you might be the number one show in the country now, he said, but on this very lot, he said, 10 years ago, there was a show that every actor wanted to be on. Everybody, they, of that era, George Gobel and Milton Berle and Julie Newmar and all these stars, Vincent Price, all wanted to be on this show. And he said that show was the number one show in the country. And he said, but that show ended after 2 years, and those two actors pretty much never worked again. He said, I bet you can't tell me the name of that show. And they huffed and puffed around. They said, well, what was it? He said, Batman. And that's the truth. And he said, now he's standing out in the parking lot with his agent thinking, I'll never work in this town again because I turned this down. And he ended up the next morning, Disney sent him the script for Condor Man. And he ended up going to Paris and Zermatt and Monte Carlo and had a big time shooting Condor Man for Disney. So it turned out good.
Very smart guy for sure.
Well, no slight on Sonny Schroyer. He was a good friend of Jim's too. They were in the longest yard together. But Enos didn't last. The spinoff did not last. So
In that business, you have to be smart, and Jim was definitely very smart.
I mean, he said, he did a lot of commercials. He was the incredible edible egg man. He did, California raisin commercials. He did a lot of commercials because they paid well. And he said, I had a family to feed. And he said a lot of actors, drew a line with, you were a movie star, or you did TV, but, there were commercial actors, right? And unless you were the spokesperson for a particular product, like the progressive lady is now, Flo or whatever, you didn't do commercials. That was beneath you, at that time. And Jim said, look, I had a family to feed, so I'm going to work, but he was judicious about some of the things that he turned down. He said he turned down 3 roles. He said he turned down the role in Enos. He turned down the role of being the plum in the Fruit of the Loom commercials, and he made Bert really mad. But he turned down the Ned Beatty role in Deliverance. And he said, "Look, Bert got mad. He said, wow, that's a great role." And Jim said, "Look, I got kids in school, and he said Ned's a great actor, and he was a good friend of Jim's too. And he said, but no matter how many wonderful roles he will have done, everybody's going to remember Squeal Like a Pig, And he said, I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to be that guy. So he turned that down. But he worked a lot. If you look at his list of credits, he worked nonstop.
A lot of classic movies as well. Sling Blade.
Yes. Yes, he was very fortunate, and television shows. Um, there was a journalist that once said that Jim was the Kevin Bacon of his era. That he was everywhere. Everybody was 6 degrees of separation from Jimmy Hampton in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. Because he did so much. He did shows like Mannix and Murder She Wrote and Matlocks and all those things. He did a lot of guest star roles. So, and he would say he was a very humble guy, and he said, an actor is lucky. The average actor is lucky if they have one really good hit television show or one really great movie that they do. Especially if you're the sidekick. You're not Harrison Ford. And And he said he was very fortunate. He was very grateful, that of the success that he had. He was very grateful, very humble guy.
Definitely. And F Troops, you got any stories about that?
Oh gosh, tons of stories. He had done a couple of episodes of Gunsmoke, and he they wanted to bring him back as a recurring, but he got a call to do F Troop, and he went in, and he had served in the Army. He was actually an interesting story. He was in the Naval Air Reserve during college, and then he got drafted in the Army in 1959, and uh, and he was in and when he walked in first day on the set, it was F Cross Sabers 6, which was the same outfit he was in the Army. So it's just kind of weird. But he and Larry Storch, who played Agarn, just loved each other to pieces. And we laugh about Larry because Larry's about 15, 17 years older than Jim. And he was a hilarious guy. And we'd go to New York or we'd see him at a Comic Con or something. Larry would look at me and he'd say, Mary, you look like 1,000,000 yen. And I'd say, Larry, that's about 26 cents. But he was a really, really sweet guy. He lived in New York in a penthouse apartment, and from his apartment, he'd been there since the 60s. And from his apartment balcony, he could see across the river where he grew up. And so that was pretty special. But he played, you may not know this about Larry, but he played a little tenor sax. And he just lived a block off of Central Park. And we went to see him one time, and it was hot. It was in the summer. And Jim said, "What have you been doing all day, Larry?" He said, "Well, I went out to the park to play my sax." And he said, I got hot. And he said, "I took my cap off." He always wore this little driving cap. And he said he took his hat off, set it on the bench. He said, "A little boy came along and put $1 in it." He said, "No, no, 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 no." So anyway, but yeah, Larry's a great guy, and they had a lot of fun. They had a lot of fun on that show.
Definitely. And I know you're into the paranormal as well as I am, and you got some pretty cool paranormal stories as well.
Well, yeah, Keith Age, the rock and roll ghost hunter, prolific,
Absolutely.
prolific
Great guy.
uh, character in that realm, and a wonderful musician as well. But great, great guy, and Jimmy just loved him to pieces. And I do too. But yeah, I've done. Keith's got a project called Bourbon Spirits, and it's his latest project. And he invited me up to an investigation at the Bell Mansion in Indiana. And this a couple years ago, and I went and I caught some really, 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 really great stuff on the FLIR, and unbelievable. It was like an apparition that was manifesting. I mean, you could see the arms and the legs and the head. It unbelievable. And that kind of stuff always happens to everybody else, not to me. So I was shocked. I was like, what am I looking at? What am I looking at? Oh, somebody come over here. But this kind of funny story. There was another wonderful paranormal investigator named April Slaughter, and yes, that is her real last name. And she used to write. She's a journalist, and she used to write for Ghost Hunters magazine, Taps magazine. And when we were first looking for a group to investigate with, I wanted somebody who was reputable, that had some experience, because I grew up in the Southern Baptist Church and I was scared to death, but I wanted to do it. So anyway, Jim was a Methodist, so he didn't care. But anyhow, so we found April, and we went. And she's written some wonderful books, Ghost Hunting Texas, Ghost Hunting Ohio. She was engaged by a publisher to write, under the kind of the travel book kind of section, where she visits purportedly haunted sites and then talks about them. And you have to be kind of a historian as well, because these places, you got to know the history. And so she invited us to go on an investigation down in the stockyards in Fort Worth, and they still do the cattle drive down there, and like that. And the woman that owned this place down in the basement, this had been there since, like, I don't know, 72 or something. And it had been everything down there. It had been a a saloon. It had been a brothel. It had been a speakeasy. It had been everything. And she was convinced, and that it was haunted. And so we went and we did the investigation, we split up, and Jim and I were not on the same team. And so when we came back together and people were talking about what they had experienced and what they'd seen, and Jim was mesmerized because he had seen an old poster and it was faded and torn and everything. He was so excited about it because there was a stripper back in the 50s and she went by the name of Candy Bar. And oh, it was a big scandal because she had some mobster boyfriend and she shot him and she got away with it. And at the time she was still alive. And Jim's like, there's a Candy Bar poster over here. Candy Bar performed here. He didn't care anything about the ghost. He was so excited about Candy Bar. So Texas Monthly did a big write up on her. She's passed now, but they did a wonderful write up on her. Oh gosh, she made the cover of the Texas Monthly. I want to say maybe 10 years ago or something. Really interesting. I didn't know anything about her, but yeah, it was kind of like that Lana Turner thing where you have a bad guy in your life and you shoot him and you don't go to jail. So because everybody's so glad they're gone. I shouldn't have said that. I take that back for anybody who gets mad at me for saying that. But anyway, interesting character, Candy Bar. Read about her.
Candy bar.
Candy Bar.
No, that's a funny story.
And he was a teenager at the time, and I was like, "Well, how do you know Candy Bar? You're 17." He goes, "Everybody knew Candy Bar. It's like you and Harold and Kumar. You shouldn't have been watching that movie."
I could just tell he was a funny guy.
Oh man, he was great. He was great. He uh he has this other story. He wrote his autobiography, which is you can get on Amazon. It's called What and Give Up Show Business, and it's just a compilation of these wonderful, wonderful, wonderful stories. Jim worked with everybody, and they're ergo, 6 degrees of separation, Jimmy Hampton. Um, but he believed that when he got full of himself, sometimes he said, which wasn't often, but he said God just had this way of kind of going, nah, not so fast. And he said he had gone to the store one day, and the way Jim shopped at the grocery store, because he did it, this is the way he did it. He'd get a cart, and he'd park the cart at the end of the aisle. Then he'd run up and down the aisle and put things in his arms and come back and dump it all in the cart, and then he'd go to the next aisle. So he tells a story about how he was in a really big hurry, and they were giving a party that night or something, and he'd run to the store to get all the stuff, and so he got the cart and he parked it at the end of the aisle, and he ran up and he was getting his stuff and plopped it back in the cart and went to the next aisle, and he said there were these two elderly ladies at the end of the aisle, and they were looking at him and they were whispering, and he thought, oh no, they recognize me. They're going to want to talk. They're going to want an autograph. I don't have time. I don't have time. And so he went on to the next aisle and got all his groceries, went up, and then carried it back and plopped it in the cart and went to the next home. There they were. There the ladies were again. And he was trying to avoid eye contact, and he just, he just didn't have the time. And so he went to the next aisle with the cart, parked it at the end of the aisle, ran up and down, and there they were. And he said to himself, he said, Hampton, these are your fans. These are the people that see your movies and watch your television shows, and you just need to get down off your high horse and you need to sign an autograph or two and take a few minutes. So he just kind of loitered around in the bread aisle, and here they came, here they came, here they came. And he said this one little old lady looked at him and said, young man. And he said, yes ma'am, as he was getting the pen out of his jacket to sign the autograph. She said, you're pushing our cart. They had no idea who he was. He had just pushed their cart, mistakenly rather than his own, and they were just trying to get their cart back.
Uh,
So, when your ego starts getting big, not so fast.
that's a funny story.
Well, I enjoy talking about him, and when he passed a couple years ago, he had not worked in Hollywood per se. We moved to Dallas. He retired. We moved to Dallas in 2002, and he died in 2021. And during that time, he worked. I mean, he did several movies and like that, and he was interviewed a lot. And locally, he continued to play in celebrity golf tournaments, raising money for charity. And like I said, we probably did 15 or 20 Comic Cons a year all over the world, and he was out there. But he really hadn't worked in Hollywood for many years. And when he passed, People Magazine, Variety, The Hollywood Reporter, New York Times, LA Times, the NBC Nightly News, all these news outlets reported on his passing. And to me, that spoke volumes about the impact that he had in Hollywood. He was just a staple, and people have said to me, if I turned the TV on and I saw Mr. Hampton on TV, I thought this is going to be a good show because they enjoyed watching him. A young man came up to me and he was looking at the pictures on the table, and he said, Mr. Hampton just had a comfortable face. And I thought about that. I thought, yeah, he did. You watched him and it was like old home week, very familiar.
Yeah. I mean, these are shows people grew up on and everything, and that's what people do is watch shows to wind down and relax and stuff. And
Right, right.
he's brought people good memories, and you have as well.
Well, not to his group, but I'm still working, so we'll see.
You still are, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Just like with
I
me watching
still
Blockbuster.
auditioning, still working, out there, nose to the grindstone.
That's a Tyler Childers song.
Well, as actors, we kind of never stop working in one respect or another. I'm writing, and Jim wrote a screenplay with a high school friend of his, and we are in the process of trying to get that produced, and very, very excited about that. It's called Maple Park. And it is a wonderful story. It's a coming of age story set in the 50s, and it revolves around baseball. And so I'm very, very hopeful that we can get that film made.
Definitely. That's gonna be cool.
Yeah, as a tribute to him. Who doesn't like baseball? Who doesn't like the 50s, right? That's
Definitely.
just that's a magical era, the 1950s. It just, look at Happy Days, it lasted 9 years and had two spinoffs, Laverne and Shirley and Joni and Chachi and something else, I think. And then, Grease. And then it was the 60s, but look at Mad Men. I mean, people are just kind of intrigued by that particular era in history, I think.
Definitely. There's some great shows back then. I mean, Gunsmoke,
Yep.
Gomer Pyle as
Gunsmoke.
well.
Yep. Gomer. Yep.
Great movie.
I never met Gomer, but I met what was his girlfriend's name? Oh gosh,
Oh
in
man.
the show.
Off Andy
Uh
or
what?
Gomer Pyle? Was it off Andy Griffith or Gomer Pyle show?
Gomer Pyle. It was Gomer's girlfriend. She was blonde, and I can't remember her name, but I met her at a show, a Western show that we went to, Western autograph show, and I can't. Oh, dang it! Her name started with, like, I want to say Flucy, but it's not that. It was oh, see, and I don't have my phone. I can't Google it.
Yeah,
But Gomer, my mother was Korean, but my father was from North Carolina. So, we religiously watched Andy Griffith, Mayberry RFD, and Gomer Pyle in our house every week without fail, because that was all from North Carolina. So, and then it was Matlock. We had to watch Matlock, which I loved actually. So,
that's a classic as well. Did
yep.
Jim have any Gunsmoke stories?
Well, I will give you one. It's pretty funny. When Gunsmoke was the very first show out of Hollywood that he got, and he had already done that little short subject film that got nominated for Academy Award, and suddenly he had every agent in Hollywood calling him, and so he went in, and by that time the show had been on for 10 years, or maybe more. I don't know. It was a radio show before it was TV, and James Arness, who was a giant hulking person, 6'7" or whatever. He pretty much didn't come for camera blocking or rehearsals or anything. He had a stand-in, and his stand-in would tell him, okay, here's where you stand, and then you walk over here when you say that. And Jim said he did 3 episodes, and he said Arness just kind of did his own thing. He said he might have a script, and the script might say, well, that man looks like he's injured pretty badly, and I think that we should think about taking him over to the doc to have a look see. And Arness would look at the script and he'd kind of throw it aside and he'd say, "Get him to docs." That's what he'd say. And so the scene that they were doing was that one of those classic scenes where somebody has died, and in this episode it is Jimmy's father. And there's a mound on a hill far away, and all you see is the silhouette of the mound with a cross in it and some people standing around it. And so in this particular scene, it was Jim and this actress. She was a new actress from New York, and she'd studied with, Meisner or, Stella Adler or somebody famous. And she was, and so the scene was the two of them are standing by this grave, and Arness is standing at the head of the grave, and he takes his hat off and he puts it over his heart and he says, amen. Well, nobody had really any lines. Nobody had lines because it was just that scene. And so the director was up there, and it was Jim and this young woman. Her name was Mariana Hill, and a pretty blonde girl. And so the director says, "Okay, all you got to do is stand here because we're not going to hear. You don't have any lines." And Jim Arnett's just going to come up and he's going to say Amen or something. Okay. And so this young actress says, "Well, do you mind if I pick some wildflowers?" And the director says, "Well, I don't care." And so she had this book of sad things. So she read this book of sad things, like I don't know what was in it, something sad that happened to her, and it made her cry. And so James Arness had been told, look, all you got to do is stand there. There's no lines. You just take your hat off. And so when he pulls up to the set, which is outside on this hill, and he sees my Jim, and this Mariana Hill actress standing there, and he's been told that there's no lines. And so the crew is like 100 yards down the hill, and the director's got one on a megaphone, and Arness is the only one mic'd up, and so you hear down the hill, action. And so at action, this young actress begins to sob her eyes out. Oh, and she's throwing the wildflowers on the grave. And Arness shoots my Jim a look like, what the hell did you say to her? And Jim's like, well, I don't. And he got so flustered that he took his hat off, put over his heart, and he couldn't remember his lines. He said, well, the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away, and I'll kiss your ass if that ain't a square deal. And so you hear this beat, and then everybody down the hill starts laughing. And so Jim used that line so many times throughout his life. When he saw injustice in the world or something bad happen, he'd say, well, the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away, and I'll kiss your ass if that ain't a square deal. So
Yeah,
that's where he got that line from. But so that, he had so many great stories, and his book is full. His autobiography is just full of stories. Everybody from Michael J. Fox. There's lots of stories about F Troop, and even working, on a Ron Howard show early on. Early on, he knew all those Howards, the dad, and he knew the kids, and he actually bounced Clint Howard on his knee when Clint was a little bitty kid. So it's he goes he went way back with him. He's worked with everybody, and again, just a great career, and I'm very, very proud of him. So miss him.
definitely, definitely. And where can people get his book at?
Amazon. Or if you see me at a Comic Con, I'll have them. But it is got all 5 stars on Amazon. And again, it's called What and Give Up Show Business. So they'll love it. It's hilarious.
Definitely. Definitely appreciate you being on, and
Oh, thank
appreciate you sharing
you.
all these stories as well
Thank
with
you. I love to do it. I love to talk about him, and thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed it immensely.
definitely. I want to thank Mary Deese Hampton for being on. I want to thank everybody for listening. Everybody check out nighthawk-radio.com. Everybody have a good night and God bless.